Germany isn't just stumbling into a recession, it is committing economic suicide in real time. The industrial engine that powered Europe for decades has been severed from its fuel source and forced to buy expensive alternatives from its so-called allies. We aren't interested in the political speeches or the optimistic forecasts. We are looking at the cold, hard ledgers to explain why the Made in Germany label is rapidly becoming a relic. This is the story of how a manufacturing superpower turns into a museum. Let's establish the baseline before we get into the grim details. Germany was the only G7 nation to contract for 2 consecutive years. While the US economy was growing and even other European nations managed to limp forward, Germany was shrinking. That is not a coincidence. Now, the official narrative, the one peddled by politicians and central bankers, is that this is merely a cyclical downturn. They want you to believe it's just a rough patch. They tell you that once interest rates drop and global trade picks up, the factories will hum again and the export machine will roar back to life. The data backs this up with terrifying clarity. Manufacturing PMI has been contracting for over 27 consecutive months. That is a record of futility usually reserved for sanctioned states or active war zones, not the economic powerhouse of Europe. This is a bloodbath, and you need to understand why this matters specifically for Germany. Germany's wealth was never built on what I call the BS economy. It wasn't built on financial derivatives, consulting apps, or serving overpriced lattes to tourists. It was built on the real economy, tangible value, chemicals, steel, cars, high-precision machinery that the rest of the world couldn't replicate. When you kill the manufacturing base, you don't magically transition into a sleek, high-tech service utopia. You get a poverty economy. You cannot run a welfare state on dog walkers and yoga instructors. You need the surplus value that comes from heavy industry. When those factories close, the high wages vanish, the tax base crumbles, and the technical expertise, which takes generations to build, evaporates. You are left with a hollow shell. So, we have a country that is effectively deindustrializing because it can no longer afford to make things. The gap between the government's optimism and the reality on the factory floor is now so wide you could drive a tank through it. But this collapse didn't happen by accident. It wasn't bad luck. It started the moment the lights got too expensive. Let's look at the math behind the so-called German miracle. For decades, economists treated German prosperity like it was the result of some unique cultural magic, superior discipline, better education, or smarter management. But if we strip away the national mythology and look at the ledger, we see a much simpler formula. It was a geopolitical arbitrage play. The entire business model relied on combining world-class German engineering with dirt-cheap Russian natural gas. That was the spread. That was the margin. The cheap energy was the subsidy that made the expensive labor and high taxes viable. Then came the Nord Stream reality check. Regardless of your stance on the politics, we have to acknowledge the physics. Germany was importing 55% of its natural gas from Russia. To sever that connection overnight, without a viable, cost-equivalent backup, wasn't a strategy, it was mathematical insanity. It's the economic equivalent of a deep-sea diver cutting his own air hose because he decided he didn't like the tank manufacturer. You can have the moral high ground, or you can have oxygen. You rarely get to keep both. The result is a price disparity that makes competition physically impossible. Let's do the math. In the United States, thanks to the shale revolution, industrial competitors are paying somewhere between 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. In Germany, industry has been getting hammered with prices ranging from 20 to 38 cents per kilowatt hour. That isn't a competitive disadvantage, that is a death sentence. You cannot out-innovate a 400% difference in your primary input cost. No amount of efficiency or digitalization fixes a ledger where the energy to turn on the machine costs more than the profit from the widget it produces. The gap is effectively the size of the entire profit margin for most heavy industries. But here is where the tragedy turns into a farce. This is the green paradox. In the middle of the worst energy crisis in modern history, while industry was gasping for air, the German government decided to proceed with shutting down their last 3 nuclear power plants. They took perfectly functional, zero-carbon, base-load power generation offline due to ideological fanaticism. The result? They were forced to burn lignite coal, the dirtiest fuel on Earth, and scramble for expensive liquefied natural gas just to keep the lights on. They effectively increased emissions to commit economic suicide. It is a level of policy malpractice that future historians will struggle to comprehend. Consider the irony of the energy vendor, the energy transition. Germany spent hundreds of billions of euros to transition to green energy. The promise was a cleaner, modern economy. The reality is a grid that is too expensive for heavy industry to use. This is the energy trap. Sectors like chemicals, steel, glass, and aluminum aren't leaving because they want to. They are leaving because the laws of thermodynamics and economics say they must. You cannot melt steel with good intentions. You need joules, and those joules now cost too much to turn a profit. The harsh reality is that energy-intensive industries act as the foundation for the rest of the economy. When the chemical plants shut down, the supply chains break. When the steel mills go cold, the car manufacturers lose their local advantage. Germany walked into this trap with its eyes open, convinced that it could rewrite the laws of economics. It couldn't. But if Germany can no longer buy cheap gas from the East, they have to get it from somewhere. And that brings us to the question nobody in Berlin wants to ask out loud. Who exactly benefits from selling Germany expensive gas? This brings us to the most uncomfortable part of the conversation. The geopolitical pivot. We are told repeatedly that Germany liberated itself from Russian energy dependence. That sounds heroic in a press release, but if you look at the balance of payments, it wasn't a liberation. It was a hostile transfer of wealth. Germany didn't solve its energy problem, it just handed the keys to a different supplier, one that charges a massive premium for the exact same commodity. Let's look at the undisputed winner of this new arrangement. It isn't Berlin, it is Washington. In the first quarter of 2024 alone, US LNG exports to Europe spiked by 60%. The United States effectively replaced cheap, continuous pipeline gas with expensive, logistically complex, shipped gas. The physics of this trade are brutal. You have to freeze the gas in Texas, put it on a boat, sail it across the Atlantic, and regasify it in a German terminal that barely existed 3 years ago. That process costs money, a lot of money. And who captures that margin? American energy companies. The US is now the undisputed energy hegemon of Europe, and they are charging market rates for the privilege. Germany traded a dependency on a geopolitical rival for a dependency on an economic competitor, and the markup is destroying their margins. But here is the kicker. While European industry was bleeding out from these energy costs, the US government didn't offer a lifeline. They offered a lure. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. Do not let the boring name fool you. This was a massive, aggressive industrial subsidy package designed to suck capital out of Europe and deposit it into the American Midwest. While German factories were facing a 400% hike in electricity bills, the US government effectively said, "Is your energy too expensive? Come to the US. We have cheap gas, we have tax credits, and we will pay you to build your factory here." It was predatory economic policy disguised as domestic stimulus. It was a knife in the back of European industry, delivered with a smile. This leads us to the vassal state reality. Germany has aligned its foreign policy completely with US interests. They cut off Russia, their primary energy supplier. They are cooling relations with China, their primary export market. They are doing exactly what the US State Department wants. But in return, the US economic policy is aggressively America first. Germany is getting squeezed in a vice. On one side, you have American protectionism and energy dominance. On the other side, you have Chinese competition flooding the global market with subsidized EVs and machinery. Germany has stripped itself of all geopolitical leverage. It has no cheap energy, no independent foreign policy, and no protection for its core industries. We have to dissect the ally narrative with cold cynicism. Does the United States want a strong, independent Europe that competes for global markets? Or does it benefit strategically from a deindustrialized Germany that is wholly dependent on American energy for survival and American hardware for security? The ledgers tell us the answer. The US economy is booming on the back of energy exports and reshoring, while the German economy contracts. The wealth is moving west across the Atlantic. The United States has effectively turned Germany into a captive market for its LNG and a buffer zone for its geopolitical conflicts. This isn't a partnership of equals. It is an economic cannibalization. Germany is currently paying the bill for American hegemony, and the currency they are paying with is their own industrial future. This geopolitical squeeze isn't theoretical. It isn't just lines on a map or speeches at the UN. We can see the damage in the corporate balance sheets right now. We need to look at the corporate body count. If you want to know which way the wind is blowing, you don't look at government press releases, you look at where the capital is fleeing. And right now, the capital is fleeing Germany at a pace we haven't seen since the aftermath of the Second World War. Let's start with the canary in the coal mine, BASF. This isn't just a company, it is the world's largest chemical producer. It is the industrial nervous system of the German economy. For over a century, their massive Ludwigshafen site was the beating heart of European industry. But the math has changed. BASF is effectively checking out of Germany. They are currently pouring 10 billion euros, that is 10 billion with a B, into a massive new Verbund site in Zhanjiang, China. Do not let the PR spin fool you. They will call it global expansion. It isn't. It is a replacement strategy. At the same time they are building in China, they are permanently shutting down ammonia and other energy-intensive production lines in Germany. They are cutting jobs in Ludwigshafen while hiring in Guangdong. Why? Because the CEO told us why. He explicitly stated that Europe is increasingly non-investable. When your primary input is energy, and your energy cost is triple that of your competitors, you don't stay out of patriotism, you leave out of survival. But if BASF is the nervous system, Volkswagen is the soul, and the soul is dying. For the first time in its 87-year history, Volkswagen is closing factories on German soil. Let that sink in. Through wars, partitions, and recessions, VW never closed a German plant. Until now. Volkswagen isn't just a car company in Germany, it is a social institution. It represents the unspoken deal between the state and the worker. We provide stability, you provide labor. That deal is null and void. The management is blunt about it. They cannot compete with Chinese EVs while paying German energy prices and German wages. The ledgers are bleeding red ink. So the factories close, and the production moves to where the energy is cheap and the regulations are loose. Now you might think, okay, so a few big factories close, the economy changes. You are missing the point. Manufacturing jobs have a massive multiplier effect. When a generic service job disappears, it's sad for that individual. But when a job at BASF or VW disappears, it takes 4 or 5 other jobs with it. The logistics company that trucks the parts creates zero value without the factory. The catering service that feeds the shift workers has no customers. The specialized machine repair shop goes bankrupt. The local tax base collapses. This triggers what economists call the death spiral. As these industrial giants leave, the tax revenue they provided vanishes. But the state's expenses don't go down. In fact, they go up because of unemployment benefits and social unrest. So, what does the government do? It raises taxes on the companies and workers that are left to plug the hole in the budget. And what does that do? It makes the business environment even more hostile, forcing the next wave of companies to leave. It is a self-reinforcing loop of decline. The infrastructure crumbles because there is no money to fix it. The bridges fail. The trains, once the envy of the world, are now notoriously late because the maintenance budget is gone. Germany is cannibalizing its own foundation to pay for its daily existence. The capital flight we are seeing from BASF and VW is not a warning sign. It is the final bell. So if the factories leave, and the capital leaves, and the tax base crumbles, what is Germany actually left with? So what happens when the blast furnaces go cold and the assembly lines stop moving? You don't magically transition into a high-tech digital utopia. You get what I call the rise of the BS economy. This is the structural shift from value creation to value extraction. For 70 years, Germany got rich by taking raw materials and turning them into complex, high-precision machines that the world desperately needed. That is value creation. Now we are pivoting to a model based on bureaucracy, tourism, and government-subsidized busywork. We are trading structural engineers for compliance officers and tour guides. The industrial museum warning wasn't just a clever metaphor, it is the literal business plan. Germany is rapidly transforming into a massive, open-air theme park. It is becoming a destination where American tech moguls and Chinese industrial titans come to spend their dividends. They will visit the Neuschwanstein Castle, buy a cuckoo clock, and drive on the unrestricted Autobahn, looking at the shuttered industrial zones like they are Roman ruins. The economy shifts from exporting power to importing nostalgia. But here is the brutal reality of the ledger. A museum economy cannot fund a first-world civilization. This leads us to a terrifying economic phenomenon called smodization. It is the compression of the wage structure into a flat, miserable pancake. In the old German model, a factory job at Siemens or Bosch guaranteed a middle-class life, a house, and a pension. That job created surplus value. In the BS economy, that job is replaced by a precarious service gig or a gig economy delivery role. The government tries to mask this manufacturing collapse by hiring more bureaucrats, hiding the economic rot under a layer of public sector fat. But the result is wage compression. When you delete the industry, you delete the mechanism that distributed wealth through high-value labor. You end up with a tiny elite of asset owners and a massive underclass of service workers, with nothing in between. And the timing is absolutely suicidal. This deindustrialization is hitting exactly as the demographic time bomb explodes. Germany is aging, fast. To support a geriatric population with expensive healthcare and guaranteed pensions, you need a massive, consistent surplus of national wealth. You generate that surplus by selling high-margin chemicals and cars to the global market. You do not generate it by selling overpriced sandwiches to each other. A service economy has low productivity growth. It simply cannot generate the tax velocity required to keep the German welfare state from collapsing under its own weight. The math is screaming red. Now, the apologists will point to the United States and say, look, they deindustrialized and they are rich. But that is the most dangerous illusion of all. The United States enjoys exorbitant privilege. They control the world's reserve currency. The US can print green pieces of paper and exchange them for real goods from China or Japan. They can run massive trade deficits because the world demands their debt. Germany does not have this privilege. Germany cannot print its way to prosperity. It has to earn its living. It relies on the real balance of trade. If Germany stops making things the world wants, the euro weakens, imports skyrocket, and the standard of living collapses. Germany is not the US. Without its factories, it is just a very expensive, rainy version of Greece. Unless there is a total reversal in energy policy, a return to nuclear, or a reopening of the pipelines, this trajectory is locked in. The BS economy isn't a transition. It is a waiting room for geopolitical irrelevance. Germany traded its industrial sovereignty for a pat on the head from Washington, and the ledger is bleeding out. You are not watching a recession. You are witnessing the deliberate, mathematical dismantling of the European economic engine. The factories are gone, and the bill is coming due. If you want to survive the transition from the industrial age to the poverty of the BS economy, you need to safeguard your assets. Watch this video next. Subscribe.